So I think we can start this webinar. We don't have that much time, so we'll just begin it now and let people join after a while if they log on late. So welcome to this webinar on mass balance, and a special thank you to our external speakers that we have here today. Laura Gil Carrera from the Lego Group, Jasper Munier from Clariter, and Nicolas Humez representing Veolia. So the webinar will be recorded, and the slides and recording will be made available afterwards. So after the presentations, we plan to have a Q&A session. So please note down any questions that you have in the Q&A section in Zoom, and then we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. But first, a few words on our organization. You can switch the slides, please. Yeah, so ChemSec is an environmental NGO aiming to reduce the use of hazardous substances by collaborating with companies, highlighting positive examples, and then showing these to policymakers to find solutions that are beneficial for human health and the environment while still working for companies. We get our funding from governments and foundations, so not from companies. And we provide a number of free online tools, such as the SIN list. It's a list of hazardous chemicals fulfilling the criteria to be on the candidate list of REACH. We also have collaborations with investors, advising them on production of hazardous chemicals and the risks of investing in these. And I can switch slides, please. Our closest collaboration is with companies, and at the core of this collaboration is our ChemSec business group that you can see on the slide there. This helps us better understand what's on their agenda to target questions that really matter. So, why do we care about mass balance? Well, the reason is that we've been approached by numerous companies that struggle with increasing their use of recycled polymers without compromising on the chemical content. And then it's natural to look into using materials from non-mechanical recycling, what's usually referred to as chemical recycling, a group of various technologies actually very different from each other. And then the companies are faced with the challenge of evaluating materials that sometimes are mass balanced. What does that mean for the content, truthful communication towards customers, and corporate values then? So I will leave to my colleague Jonathan to elaborate a bit on this.
So thank you, Teresa. So I will give a very brief overview of plastic recycling technologies and mass balance in order for all of us to get on the same page on definitions and what it actually entails. So plastic recycling can be done in a few different ways. I've listed a few here, but the important thing to take away is that if you do not make a plastic, you will break down the plastics within the plastic recycling. That means you will either get monomers or you will get building blocks that you then can form to monomers, and then eventually back to plastic polymers. And if you do break down the plastics to monomers or building blocks, you can employ what's called mass balance in order to form the plastic polymers eventually. So basically, mass balance is the mixing of fossil raw material with raw material from plastic wastes. And this will, of course, then yield a mixed product. So a product containing carbons or plastics from both the fossil raw material and the plastic waste raw material. And why is this done? Well, today on a general scale, I would say that the supply of suitable raw materials from plastic waste is, in many cases, of course, there are some exemptions, insufficient to achieve a segregated value chain. So I will come back to that word very soon. And the existing process technologies rely on large scale and on well-defined process parameters. So this means that what we can do is to add smaller amounts of material from plastic recycle or from recycled waste. And what does this then mean? Well, this means that this mixed product can be allocated or used in credit transfer schemes, and I will try to explain that very briefly as well. So segregated value chain is that when we have a separated process. So the recycled feedstock will go through the process and end up in a product containing 100% recycled material. But then if we take mass balance, this means that we're mixing the raw material from two different sources, either from recycled feedstock or from fossil feedstock. And this means that we get a mixed product. And you can do that in a proportional allocation, which means that if you add 40% recycled feedstock, you will get a product containing 40% of the recycled feedstock. But as the upper part of this figure, but you can also do this with what's called free allocation, and that means that you add 40% of the input material, the recycled feedstock, and you get a product where 40% of that product is allocated as 100% or consisting of 100% recycled material, which means that you allocate all the recycled or the sort of input recycled material to one part of the product. Of course, this doesn't mean that it contains 100%, but you can sell it as 100% recycled material. And the final part of this is that what's called credit transfer, where the process and the use of recycled material within one process can be credited to another product, which means that you can use a credit or certificate to show that you have been using recycled material, and you can have a product that's called 100% recycled material, but it does not contain that at all. But you can use by buying a credit for another process that's employing recycled material. So these are a very brief overview, and I will let Teresa continue.
Great, thank you. So the question now is what path to choose here in the complexity of chain of custody that Jonathan just was talking about. So this is being discussed in various different policy processes right now. But the first one that will put a legal stamp on this is the one on how to calculate recycled PET in bottles. We expect the Commission to present a proposal on this in October. Most of the companies that we talk to are not really interested in PET bottles, but this is about creating a blueprint also for other uses of mass balance for plastics and maybe even for other materials and resources. And that is why it's critical to get this right. And as I said, we've been in contact with a large range of companies, and we've asked 3 of them today to present, representing different parts of the supply chain. So I want to hand over to the first company, Clariter, where Jasper Munier will talk on their business and view on this. Jasper, he has a diverse background, including public-private financing, projects and business development, innovation and public affairs. At Clariter, he focuses on growth-related activities and serves as a board member at Chemical Recycling Europe. Clariter is a global clean tech company that upcycles post-consumer plastic waste into advanced oil, solvents and waxes. The floor is yours, Jasper.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. I thank ChemSec also for the invitation to speak here today. And also thank you to everyone joining us today for this vital discussion. Jonathan, could you click on the next slide, please? Yeah, as Teresa said, I'm representing Clariter, a trailblazer in the chemical recycling industry since our foundation in Poland already 20 years ago. Thanks to our brilliant team and invaluable partnerships around the globe, we achieved something very remarkable. Teresa mentioned we're able to transform plastic waste that nobody wants into products that everybody needs on a daily basis. In our case, we produce high quality, high purity chemical products, solvents, oils, and waxes. We do this through a unique recycling process based on pyrolysis, as many of you might know. But by this, we replace fossil virgin carbon with sustainable carbon from plastic waste. Basically, what we try to do and what others try to do is how do we enable a fossil-free circular chemical production? Petrochemicals without the petro, so to say. Jonathan, if you click on the next slide. Now, of course, Clariter is also scaling up. You know, our first move is here in Europe, but we can't do this alone. In the spirit of the proverb, alone you must go, you can go faster, but together we come further. We urge everybody to unlock plastic waste as a replacement for fossil virgin products. But the question arises, of course, as a stage of this webinar is, how should we value and account for this plastic waste? How do we ensure that recycling is fair play? And this is where mass balance comes in. Question is only, why does this matter? Well, it aligns with the principles that underpin the European Green Deal, which is consumer trust, transparency, and a level playing field. Jonathan, please, next slide. So consumer trust is paramount. And this is not just about our products, but it's also about the origin and the composition of the products. And we believe that consumers should choose sustainable products with confidence. This trust is vital also for the chemical industry itself, and it's vital for achieving the Green Deal targets, because without trust, scaling chemical recycling industry will struggle. And the Green Deal and the green transition won't happen. Next slide, please. And the foundation for trust is transparency. It's about how we report on our progress, ensuring that our actions align with our goals, empowering consumers and everybody can see that the path we're on. At Clariter, we process polyolefinic plastic waste into solvents, oils, and waxes. And we do that with an 85% yield without co-processing any crude-based liquids. Hence, our products are 100% recycled content without mass balance calculations needed. And we can transparently claim this recycled content, and we stand by it. Please, next slide, please. But with increased demand in mandatory EU targets and pressure on plastic waste feedstock growth, how are we able to meet our targets in 2030 and 2040? And by the way, mass balance already is being used, as you can see here on the slide. This is a milk pack from the Netherlands. I reckon many of you speak Dutch, but mass balance is being used here as well. So at Clariter, we advocate for the platinum version of mass balance, the proportional allocation. And we have 3 reasons to do this. Firstly, we to ensure the level playing field and the drive of innovation. Only products that are genuinely made with 100% recycled content should be able to make such a claim. Otherwise, we remove the incentive to continuously do better. Secondly, to maximize plastic waste efficiency in the most economic way. We must aim for chemical recycling processes with the highest possible yields. And thirdly, we have to safeguard trust in the chemical and recycling industry, ensuring that consumers choose sustainable products and they can do so with confidence. Next slide, please. So the chemical recycling industry is a nascent and diverse industry. And as a member of this ecosystem, we understand the reasons for which some of our peers see mass balance fuel exempt as the best way to achieve Europe's recycled content targets, which is why we advocate for collaboration between industry, policymakers, and civil society. To us, this issue extends far beyond plastics. It touches various products, like already was introduced by Jonathan and Teresa. It touches on products like cosmetics and textiles and coatings, for which we also need recycled feedstocks, as the EU makes sustainable products the norm through its eco-design regulation. Next slide, Jonathan. So in closing, we must reevaluate practices to increase our standards for trust, transparency, and fairness. Proportional allocation without credit transfers stands as the most ethical and the most transparent model. And I urge policymakers here today to assess the concept of mass balance through this lens. Shortcuts in transparency can result in long delays in gaining public trust, a commodity far too precious to risk. And yes, of course, the road ahead is undoubtedly challenging, but it's precisely in the challenges that opportunities for innovation lie. Next slide, Jonathan. So to policymakers, I say, let's draft transparent, fair legislation for a sustainable future built on trust. And to industry leaders out there, let's innovate and collaborate, making replacement of fossil fuels the norm while preserving a level playing field for all. And civil society, your role as watchdogs and advocates is indispensable. Thank you for your attention and look forward for the discussion.
Thank you so much. That was very inspiring and enlightening. And I also see that people have started to place questions in the Q&A, and that's great. Please continue to do that. We'll bring it up at the end. So the next speaker is Nicolas Humez. Unfortunately, he has a bit of problems with his camera, so we'll just listen to him, and that's going to be fine too.
I fixed my issue, so it's okay.
Okay. So Nicolas holds a PhD in chemistry, and he is the Director of Public Affairs at SARP Industries, subsidiary of Veolia, dedicated to hazardous waste management. And after many years of experience, he has a very good overview of the wide range of different treatments like recovery and disposal, including expertise in evaluating both technical and practical feasibility. The floor is yours, Nicolas.
Thank you very much, Teresa. My two first points are a little bit broader than only mass balance and chemical recycling issues, but I think that it's very important to have a complete picture in order to understand the position of Veolia. So my first point is, as an introduction, it's very important to reposition plastic recycling within the global production of plastics, which is expected to continue to grow exponentially in the coming decades. So in that context, plastic recycling should not be an excuse for accepting plastic production growth. You understand that if we have this exponential growth, the recycling will never be sufficient to inflect the production of virgin plastics, which is the final target, I guess, in terms of action for participating in resolving the triple planetary crisis. Thus, in addition to create a fair legislative and regulatory framework on plastic recycling, including mechanical and chemical recycling, we need to have clear rules on what I call sobriety, which is a bit different in English than in French, but you understand that I mean that less consumption and less production of useless materials in plastic. My second introductory point is focusing on the presence of substances of concern in plastics. The last UN report on chemical in plastic, published in order to provide information to the discussion on the Treaty on Plastic Pollution, pointed out that the number and the quantity of hazardous chemicals of concern in plastic used as additive mainly are huge. In addition, most of these additives are not chemically bound to the polymers. Consequently, they can migrate outside the plastic products and pose threat to humans and the environment. Additionally, the presence of substances of concern has to be taken into consideration at the recycling step in order first not to contaminate clean plastic waste to mechanical recycling, and second, not to pollute, for instance, pyrolysis oils, which will never find a use in plastic to plastic. And the only possibility would be dilution of these dirty oils with other streams or use as fuels, which is not admissible for us. So to summarize, it is important to look at the presence of substances of concern at different stages: eco-design, purity of pyrolysis oil, and recycled plastic outputs, both for mechanical and chemical recycling. Now I will share with you the position of Veolia regarding chemicals versus mechanical recycling and mass balance issues related to that. Two prerequisites to our position. First of all, eco-design and recyclability should be prioritized for mechanical recycling. For instance, plastics in new products should be mechanically recycled. And secondly, we fear scramble for feedstock, as the pyrolysis process cannot deal with any type of mixed or not mixed plastics, and the yield of the process and the quality of the pyrolysis oil depend on it. So now regarding specifically mass balance, the current work, as it has been said by Teresa of the Commission on mass balance, is in the framework of the Single-Use Plastic Directive. We are talking about plastic recycling only, but pyrolysis process can have 3 types of outputs: plastic, fuel, and other materials like wax, for instance. To ensure a level playing field between mechanical and chemical recycling, the method should allow comparability. Therefore, only plastic should be taken into account in the mass balance approach. This means that fuel and other material should not count as plastic recycling. Only plastic to plastic should be counted as plastic recycling. And regarding now the different mass balance approaches, ideally, or in an ideal world, we would go for rolling average, but we know that it's not easily applicable for some processes and, for example, for pyrolysis. So if we go to the other, I would say, credit methods, the best option for us is the proportional, as it allows full comparability with mechanical recycling. And the proportional allocation should be the one used as the minimum requirement, minimum standard. If we go to polymers only, yes, for us it's also acceptable, but these need clear system boundaries, and I will come back on the boundaries later on. The last one is fuel use exempt, and for us this is really not acceptable, as plastic recycled as other material would count as plastic recycling. The fuel use excluded allocation takes into account the production of energy products, which reduce the part allocated to monomers, but does not take into account the simultaneous production of other material. This approach does not provide any incentive to produce the most desirable monomers. As such, it cannot be recommended for plastic recycling, as it is artificially increases the recycled share allocated to monomers and does not give an accurate picture of the plastic reality. So you understand that we really are in favor of a mass balance methodology or approach which is as close as possible to the physical streams. Finally, regarding the system boundaries that need to be set up, first of all, no credit transfer, or what we call book and claim, between entities and site or installation. Secondly, no negative credit, which is an idea that is flowing at the moment, and only what is produced can be allocated. We should put also a review clause in order to look at the development of new technologies and the feasibility of using calculation method with higher physical traceability. The chosen mass balance approach must be certified by an accredited third party. Any claim under a mass balance system shall be clearly identified as such with a specific status. And finally, the legal status of energy product also needs to be clarified. It is energy recovery, it is not and should never be considered as recycling. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. The next speaker comes from the LEGO Group, and that's Laura Gil Carrera. She's a senior manager for environmental sustainability at the LEGO Group. So she has profound knowledge in a wide range of sustainability areas, such as sustainable materials and plastics and recycling technologies. She knows a lot of the different aspects of mass balance and chain of custody models, and is part of driving the LEGO Group position on this topic. The floor is yours, Laura.
Thank you, Teresa. Hi, everyone, and thanks especially to Chemsec for giving us today the opportunity to explain you more about how we work in the LEGO Group with mass balance and its relevance for our sustainability journey. So next slide, please. So yes, I will start with a little bit of a background. And in the LEGO Group, we have strong sustainability ambitions, being the most relevant ones for the topic today, the science-based target to reduce our emissions by 37% in 32, and then in the long term also the pledge to become net zero by 50. And also in 32, we have the ambition to have more sustainable and circular materials in our products. And that's where the mass balance plays also an important role to achieve this target. We see a mass balance as a temporary solution. So it's a stepping stone to increase the volumes and demand for recycle and also for renewable materials, which will eventually lead to a transition into segregated and measurable content in our products. Because that's our end goal, to be able to say that this brick contains X% of recycled content, while also making our supply chain more sustainable. And mass balance can obviously help in the transition to have more sustainable materials in the long run. And as a consumer-facing brand producing toys for children, we also have the responsibility to ensure that mass balance brings real environmental benefits and also promotes the systemic change that is needed in the industry. And that's also what our consumers are expecting from us. And next slide, please. And since currently there is no standard for the mass balance change of custody or specific requirements, so we have developed our internal requirements when we purchase mass balance-based plastics, which we have been doing already for 3 years. And the main and critical requirements that we have is that there should be a physical connectivity from input to output. And that means that from the raw material, following all the steps, intermediate chemicals, into the polymer and then into our product, there should be a physical link, either that's happening within the same facility or it's transported by pipeline, shipment, or any means of transportation. But there should be a physical transfer to ensure that at least there's the possibility of having a content in the end product. And then the chemical connectivity from input to output, which is equally important as a physical connectivity. This means that only the raw material used to make the product can be used to enable the shift, and that the recycled raw material can only replace its own part in the product. So that means that from the raw material, from the chemical, it should be chemically, technically, and efficiently possible to go into the polymer that we use in our products. So we won't accept any other raw material which chemically we cannot get into our polymers, and that's an extreme example would be like using a recycled polypropylene and then attribute it to PET or any other polymer. So these two requirements are the most critical for us. So that also means that we do not accept a credit transfer, because credit transfer might seem at first sight that it has more flexibility, but in reality, it's limiting the improvement in the environmental performance of the products overall, and also would rely on the virgin fossil for a much longer period. And what is also most important, it can undermine the trust in all mass balance models, because a company could, for example, and truthfully, just claim that 20% of its inputs are recycled, and that goes into the output, while the actual output has 0% recycled content, because it is technically impossible to find any content in the end products because it is lacking the chemical and the physical connectivity. Hence, a chemical and physical connectivity, it's the only way to ensure a traceability in the supply chain, and it's the only one that brings also the possibility, as I previously mentioned, to have a physical content in the end product, which means that by increasing volumes of recycled raw materials, then we can increase that content that goes into the product, and at some point also reach the segregated and measurable content in the end product. And that's what we are looking for. And that's also ensuring this traceability. It's critical to make credible claims for our products. And it's what our consumers would expect, that if we say that this brick is made with the recycled materials, that there is also recycled content in the product, not that there is a 0%. And then if we move to attribution or allocation, how it is being called as well, We do not accept the attribution of recycled content from processed fuels to products. And once the fuel is excluded, we aim to have a proportional attribution once the volumes of recycled raw materials have increased. But we also know, and we are realistic, that today that is not possible because there are not enough volumes in the market to achieve the proportionality. So that's why, for now, we are allowing to have not a proportional attribution, but always when the chemical and the physical connectivity is met. That's critical. So that means that attribution from a non-plastic to a plastic material is obviously not possible because technically and chemically it's not feasible and it wouldn't meet our first requirements. But the aim at some point is to have the proportional as well. And then if we move to the next slide, please. Then we have another requirement such as having a representative balancing period. The yield losses should be also accounted for when we are calculating the recycled content. We expect transparency along the entire value chain so that we can ensure that we are moving towards a more sustainable industry. Today, we rely on the sustainability and change of custody certifications, but we also recognize that this is not sufficient and there is a need also to have a proper standard for mass balance and a specific requirement and definitions of the different types of mass balance. And all of the mass balance base materials that we purchase, they should also align with our internal sustainable materials criteria, which is, for instance, reducing the environmental footprint. It should be a responsible source. It should also have a certain circularity attributes, and that's among others. And then we aim to track also the increase in the recycled raw material volumes to ensure that there is a progress, and then we are going through this transition into a more segregated content in the end. And the last thing that I want to highlight is that this is feasible today. We use it for different polymers and from several suppliers. Already when we started 3 years ago, we were very strict with having this physical link. And we've seen that during these 3 years, more and more suppliers are able to provide these options, having the physical and the chemical connectivity because it's feasible for them as well. And because all this will bring more environmental benefits and will drive a real transition of the industry to replace the virgin fossil sources and incentivize innovation and the development of more sustainable materials and technologies, which is what is needed for the transition of the products and in the industry, which is in the end what we'll want. Thank you. That was all from my side. Looking forward.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was very interesting. So, I mean, now we've heard from the companies today. Thank you so much for that. Represent different perspectives that it also reflects in points made. Companies coming from very different areas, such as construction, flooring, furniture, healthcare products, textile, outdoor gear, electronics, and others. It is the truthfulness towards customers that is the most important thing for them. And for that, you need the physical and chemical traceability and to avoid credit transfer. Our experience is that most companies are responsible or want to be responsible, driving towards true circularity, and then that's the way we need to go. So with that, I want to open up for the Q&A section. So please, Jonathan, I see that there have been a lot of questions. I'm sure you've been able to dig out some very interesting ones.
Yes, and as usual, thank you very much for everyone posing the questions. It's really helpful with us and gives a very good addition to the webinars, I think. But we don't have that much time, so I will try to go straight into the point. So first, I have a question for Nicolas, because there has been some questions regarding the the negative credit. Maybe you can develop and clarify what that means, and if that's sort of a way of avoid emissions, or what does that entail?
Yeah. This is not related to avoided emission in my opinion, but the idea, I will be short, is, for example, give you an example. You buy credit and you anticipate the fact that you will produce something later on. So it's completely virtual, and this is what we fear a bit in some of the approaches.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being short. So I would like to follow up with a question for Laura, because there has been some questions regarding that. You say that mass balance is a temporary solution and a transition solution. So is it possible for you to sort of clarify maybe what time frame are we looking at? Do you can say maybe how many years are we looking at, and when we will be able to move away from the use of mass balance to segregating? Do you have any comment on that?
I wish I had that answer already, but that would depend on how the industry is developing, and especially what type of mass balance is chosen to go forward. Because as I said, if we go for the more stricter, having the physical and the chemical traceability, we will reach sooner the segregated content than if we go for the most loose, including the credit transfer. So that depends right now not only on what we want to have, that would be obviously the sooner the better, but also in how the industry is developing, and how is also the policymakers are creating policies, and the legislation goes into that. So yeah.
Thank you. And please, Jasper or Nicolas, if you have any input on that, just please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so saying that to say what echoes what Laura says. I think it's important, like I said, that we unlock the possibilities of plastic waste. So this means we need to invest more in collection and sorting, basically, because there's 24 million tons of plastic waste out there in Europe somewhere, which is still being incinerated or landfilled. So we need to capture that value and use it.
Thank you. And following up on that, I think that this question was directed at Jasper, but I think both Nicolas and Teresa and Laura might have something to say. So how do you see the competition of mechanical versus chemical recycling? Because they use the same plastic waste sources, and what do you foresee a trouble regarding that competition?
Well, I'm just going to echo what I just said. 24 million tons. I think there's a lot to do, right? Let's face it, everything we can mechanically recycle, we should mechanically recycle, just from an environmental footprint. I think we can all agree on that. After we make sure that we reduce it, as Nicolas just said, right? We need to use sobriety in order to reduce our consumption. But the projections are countering that, right? I mean, the expectancy for plastics is even far greater than we can anticipate, I think. Nevertheless, everything which can be mechanically recycled, we should mechanically recycle. But after that, chemical recycling is the next big thing before incineration, I would say.
Yeah, I think there is a place, or there is sufficient room for all processes, and we should find the right process for the right plastic waste streams. That's all. And mechanical recycling is the easiest, and the one which poses less problem in terms of energy and CO2 emissions. So potentially this is the one we should go for, clean waste streams. So this means also that we should also work hard on better sorting, better separation at first, and this will also help us to avoid or to divert plastic from incineration and landfilling.
Thank you. And maybe a follow-up on that for Teresa. So regarding how Chemsec considers chemical and mechanical regarding sustainability, do we have a preference, or how do we see that those two different technologies?
Well, like I would say, all the companies have already said and say to us continuously, of course, it is better from an environmental point of view to mechanically recycle plastic. However, then we do have the problem with the legacy chemicals. So it depends very much on what material we're talking about. But we do see the use of what's called chemical recycling for specific uses. But of course, we have to look at the overall performance of it, the environmental impact. And like we talked about today, it needs to be honest, it needs to be transparent.
Thank you for the clarification. I think this question might be for all of you. So I'll just pose it and then we'll see who can start answering that one. So how do you think that the proportional mass balance method should be concretely applied in European legal requirements in order to ensure physical and chemical traceability? For example, for the Single-Use Plastics Directive or the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, I would say, if you allow me, proportional allocation makes it abundantly clear where the problem is, right? I mean, let's be honest. The uptake of plastic waste in the chemical transition is not sufficient. So either we have to face reality and say, listen, we need to invest more in collection and sorting in order to make sure we have a better uptake of plastic waste, or we have to talk about the targets, as we already see that the 2030 target, about 10%, might be reduced to 7.5%. In order to make the targets, we need to be able to talk about with mass balance fuel exempt. You would make it a bit more opaque, so to say, but you'll reach the targets. That's for sure. I mean, let's face it, you will be able to reach the targets, but not with proportional allocation, I think.
Thank you very much.
Just one point to add, if I may. I think that if we talk really about the single-use plastic directive or packaging, potentially, yeah, segregation and separation is key, and also more or less going closed loop. This will ease mass balance. So in those cases, I think it's more easier than in other cases, because plastic is not only bottle to bottle and these kind of things.
Can I just add a comment there? I mean, it's quite difficult to sit in a webinar and say what language we should be using, of course, especially since we haven't seen the Commission proposal either. But what is very clear, where we need to start, is to have good and proper definitions of what we will be using. So it's clear what the different definitions mean. Without this, we are going to be completely lost, whatever the text will say.
Maybe building on that, I see that we are at the end of the time, but I think we have possibility for at least one or two questions before it's closed, because it's been a lot of questions. So we'll try to answer at least one or two more. So maybe building on that, maybe also a bit of a philosophical question, but there's been a lot of questions regarding the use of mass balance. And the question is, do you think it's more important to have a fast transition with a more flexible mass balance, or better to have a more strict mass balance with a slower transition? So which one would you prefer? Probably not the easiest question to answer, but
yeah, it's a little bit back to what I said at the beginning. Is it fast if we go for the flexible? It is fast because at the beginning it might seem easier to go for it, but in the end, we are not giving also incentives especially for brands to use it, because we will never have any content in the product. So we cannot claim anything. We cannot claim anything. The consumers right now already, they don't really understand what mass balance is. And if we make it even more complicated, that there is not even possibility to have any content in the final product, this, I don't think that will help in any way the transition, especially for facing consumer brands. And as I said, having this traceability, I see that's the only way that we can increase the volumes and to have the link into a segregation in the future. So I honestly doubt that it's faster if we go for the flexible for the credit transfer, because it will bring a lot of limitations.
Yeah, I agree fully. I think it aligns perfectly what we just said, or what was in the presentations. It disrupts level playing field. That's my biggest concern for our business case. It favors plastic production, and also it makes it not clear, not transparent on our reporting to consumers that we reached or we didn't reach the targets. Right, on paper we did, but eventually, let's say 5 years from now, we will have mandatory recycled content for coatings, paints, textiles, other stuff, where we also need chemicals, and then you end up with the same problem. And people will say, "Oh, sorry, everything's being used for plastics now. What do we do then?" So I think we'll procrastinate for the future, but we should start now and not in 10 years from now.
Teresa, if you had an additional comment.
Well, I just want to highlight also, which kind of builds on what the other speakers were saying, that by doing that, we would create a lock-in that would be very difficult to get out of. I think that's important to keep in mind, that it might sound like an appealing option, but at the end of the day, if we really want to reach true circularity, that is not the way to go.
Can I add something on that very quickly? One thing, that would also hamper innovation, because if now we just go for the flexible, it's business as usual for many companies, and for those companies that they want to become a more sustainable, already produce more sustainable materials, it will be hampering their innovation and these new opportunities. So that would also have a big impact on those.
I fully agree with this last point. It's very important also for us. So yeah, we should also favor favor innovation and new processes, better processes in terms of environmental issues and carbon footprint. So with a flexible solution, we'll never go that direction.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yes,
I
please,
think,
Teresa.
I think we're out of time.
Yes.
So I was just planning to say thank you so much to the external speaker that have been so generous to speak to us today. And I'm sure it won't be the last thing we hear of this. And thank you to all the listeners who have showed so much interest. We received a lot of questions. We will have a look at them afterwards and see if we could possibly answer any of them after the webinar. And with that, I thank you so much for today, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.